Sure. That's right. How are you? Well, yourself? Welcome. Yeah.
Sorry. Minister, I'm one of the co-chairs. I'm the chair of the board.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you.
Hello, Minister. I'm the co-chair. My name is Lance Copacon.
Good morning, elders, chiefs, delegates, relatives. I'd like to call the meeting back to order. And at this point in time, I'd like to call upon our Ontario Regional Chief to introduce our guest speaker. So, Regional Chief Archibald.
Thank you, Daryl. I'm very honored to introduce Honorable Minister Seamus O'Regan, the Minister of Indigenous Services. Although some of you may know him, he is a member, you may know him as the co-host of CT's Canada AM. He is the Honorable Member of Parliament for St. John's South Mount Pearl. He's from St. John's, Newfoundland. Minister O'Regan was raised in Goose Bay, Labrador. He studied politics at St. Francis Xavier University and University College Dublin, and marketing strategies at INSEAD near Paris. He received his Master of Philosophy degree from the University of Cambridge in England. In the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, he was executive assistant to the Minister of Justice and later senior policy advisor to the Premier. In 2013, Minister O'Regan was named Distinguished Media Innovator at Ryerson University. He also served as Executive Vice President Communications at the Stronach Group of Companies. He is proud to have been named Ambassador for Bell Let's Talk, working to eliminate the stigma surrounding mental illness. Minister O'Regan has served on the boards of WWF, World Wildlife Fund Canada, Katimavik, the Company Theatre, Smiling Land, and The Rooms, where he co-chaired with General Rick Hillier the campaign to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Newfoundland's Regiment's Battle of Beaumont Hamel. Minister O'Regan has served as a minister since 2017 and is currently the Minister of Indigenous Services. I also want to add to the bio that my very first meeting with Minister O'Regan was when Cat Lake was having their crisis, and we met in Thunder Bay. That was our first real working meeting together. And I wanted to let you know that the solutions at Cat Lake are in large part to Minister O'Regan's commitment to rolling up his sleeves and finding those solutions that work for everybody. And I'm very grateful to have been able to be a part of that solution of moving Cat Lake forward. So Minister, welcome.
Thank you. Merci, miigwech. And I want to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishwaabek, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. And today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. I want to thank the elders present. I want to thank all the chiefs present. I want to thank Regional Chief Roseanne Archibald, who's right. Our first meeting was at the Thunder Bay Holiday Inn, where we sat down and worked on Cat Lake. And it was a roll up your sleeves. What can we do? Your leadership meant a great deal to me, and we were able to see things through. And I thank you very much for that. It is an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Today, I was hoping we could discuss the priorities that you and your communities have raised. Things like child and family services, Jordan's Principle, and healthcare. As Minister of Indigenous Services, I've been visiting many communities and seeing firsthand how these challenges are interconnected. They're not in isolation. They're interconnected. And how they affect your lives, your communities, and your people. I also want to underline my commitment and our government's commitment to renew the relationship with First Nations in Ontario in a way that fosters respect, recognition, and real partnership. One of the most important parts of that renewed relationship is the commitment to protect the most vulnerable members of your communities, your children. There is an overrepresentation of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children in child welfare systems right across the country. The current approach has been rightly described as a humanitarian crisis. It incentivizes apprehension over prevention. Imagine that. And it does not take Indigenous culture, experiences, and tradition into account. Too many Indigenous children end up in care away from their communities, and that must stop now. Bill C-92 is one step towards reforming the child welfare system so that you can decide the best path forward for your children and for your communities. For instance, before sending a child to live somewhere else, the new bill would affirm the jurisdiction of communities to decide if another relative, an auntie, or another community member could look after the child instead. During the summer and fall of 2018 through to my first weeks as minister, we engaged representatives of First Nations, Inuit, Métis, as well as treaty nations, self-governing First Nations, provinces and territories, experts, and those who have lived through the system. We wanted to get it right. And this co-developed process builds on the work that we have already done. Together, we will ensure that your inherent jurisdiction over child and family services is recognized and affirmed. Now, we also know that funding needs to be part of that equation in order for this bill to work. That is why we have nearly doubled the annual funding for First Nations child and family services as a government. Doubled. Beyond that, we are committed to working with you to identify your long-term financial needs. An entire generation of your children and youth are counting on us, the Government of Canada and partners, to get this right. And we've got to get it right, because we cannot let them down. I will do everything I can to ensure that parliamentarians of all stripes understand this urgency, and that we will get this bill passed. Another priority area is the well-being of First Nations children through Jordan's Principle. We remain committed to honoring our obligations under Jordan's Principle, and since 2016, more than 216,000 requests for products, services, and supports have been approved. Budget 2019 builds on this commitment with $1.2 billion over 3 years to support the continued implementation of Jordan's Principle. In addition to increased funding and addressing gaps in the system, we will continue working with you to reach consensus on Jordan's Principle outside of the tribunal process whenever we possibly can. As we continue to work together to address the urgent matters of child and family services in Jordan's Principle, we must also turn our attention to the other pressing matters that are affecting your communities. I'd like to provide you an update on Grassy Narrows, which I know is top of mind for many of you, but I want to impress upon you that the Government of Canada stands with the community of Grassy Narrows. We are strongly committed to support the planning, design, and construction of this health facility. I've been in touch with Chief Turtle, and I look forward to meeting him in person to talk about how we move ahead. We will continue to advance the work on the health facility in the community, and I urge partners and the province
and the province to join us. It is imperative that we all work together to ensure that the people of Grassy Narrows get the supports they need. Similarly, with regards to housing in Cat Lake, I want to be clear. The health and safety of the community is our top priority. In March, Chief Kiwakapau and I signed a memorandum of agreement to address the community's priorities. These included investments in health, housing, and capacity building, as well as a commitment to long-term community development. And let me emphasize something that I said very clearly in the House of Commons last week. Housing money is for housing. Housing money is for housing. The memorandum of agreement that we signed does not include fees for opportunistic consultants. I am pleased to say that as of April 1st, 49 loads of building materials and 10 modular homes have arrived in that community. Both of these situations are examples of where we can and where we must do better with and for First Nations communities. And I want to thank all of those here in the room who have supported this vital work. And I know that we will continue to work together to face these challenges as they arise. On the topic of housing more broadly, it's no secret that needs are urgent and immense in many of your communities. Since 2016, the Government of Canada has committed more than $2.5 billion in housing investments nationally for Indigenous communities. But we need to do more. We need to do more, and we need to do it better. That's why just this morning, I launched the Indigenous Homes Innovation Initiative in partnership with Infrastructure Canada. This initiative provides $30 million for new builds based on creative Indigenous-led projects. We're also going to invest another $6 million for pre-development of ideas in a process that we're calling the Accelerator, to make sure that applicants are supported based on their ideas rather than the technical resources at their fingertips. That $6 million will help them get those technical resources that they need. We're interested in their ideas. And then we'll accelerate those good ideas and we'll bring them to fruition. I should clarify that we know that this initiative does not in any way solve the housing gap. Rather, what we're hoping to do is support creative, Indigenous-led housing solutions that leverage a community's strengths, which we can then build on in the future. Right now, our government is co-developing with the AFN the 10-year First Nations National Housing and Related Infrastructure Strategy, which we expect will be completed this summer. And I also look forward to working with the Ontario Chiefs on a strategy that works for this region and that is based on collaboration, innovation, and First Nations knowledge of housing. Now, we talk a lot about community infrastructure, social development, and health services, as we should. These are essential to the well-being of your communities. But when we have these conversations, we need to make sure that we save room for discussions on economic development. Healthy communities, and I mean that in the true sense of the holistic sense of the word, they have a common thread of economic sustainability and ideally, prosperity. I've heard many of you say that the generations to come need hope for the future, that they need to have belief in their personal and in their communal prosperity. And so those of us here today can provide that hope for the future by working towards wealth development. We need to work together to strengthen communities by providing safe and affordable housing, dependable and robust infrastructure, and secure and prosperous jobs. Prosperous. Prosperity. That's what we need. And the marketplace, lenders, venture capitalist partners, they are waking up to the power of 1.6 million Indigenous people in Canada. 1.6 million that is expected to increase to 2 to 2.5 million by 2036. Since 2006, the Indigenous population has grown at 4 times the rate of non-Indigenous Canadians. It is the fastest and the youngest population in Canada. And according to a 2011 TD Economics Special Report, the Aboriginal market in Canada, as they called it, was expected to sit at $32 billion by 2016. But leaders in the sector, like Carol Ann Hilton of Indigenomics, believe that this number could be as high as $100 billion. There are right now more than 43,000 First Nations, Inuit, and Métis in Canada who are business owners. And we want to see a lot more. A lot more. Prosperity means control. It can mean freedom. It can mean greater independence. It can mean real self-determination. And I know that many of you in this room are ready. This is the part of the speech that causes some people who work for me in the room to get a little nervous, because I don't look at the iPad any longer. I want to speak to you, and I mean this in the kindest sense of the word, with pride. I want to speak to you politician to politician. I have a keen understanding of the importance of representing your constituencies. I also have a keen understanding that it's important that we develop a relationship. I haven't been in the job for very long, as many of you know. And there's been all sorts of politics in Ottawa, as many of you know. The first thing I want you to know is that nothing has kept me from the work. Nothing. The media may be very well distracted. And the media may be following this story and not other important stories. Many of you may remember President Obed's interjection in Iqaluit when the Prime Minister and I were there with him for the apology in Iqaluit. The national media came, and their questions were really just about Ottawa politics. In fact, that's what they were all about. And President Obed took the mic and said that he felt disrespected, and that people there felt disrespected. And that while many in the media talk about the importance of reconciliation and the path towards reconciliation, sometimes they just get caught up in a story. That story has not distracted me 1 minute from the work that's before me. And I know it's an election year, and I can tell you that has not distracted me 1 moment from the work ahead of me. There'll come a time when we'll campaign, and there'll come a time when we'll be campaigning all the time. But I, perhaps maybe because I'm a newbie at this, because I'm a freshman politician, I'm actually naive enough to think that I will be judged on the work that I do. And I will work until I have to campaign. And then I will campaign on the work. So you have my 100% intention. And you have my heart. Many people know me, I know from Canada AM, and I was very fortunate for 10 great years on that show. It allowed me to explore many issues in detail. But it wasn't really the plan. I worked in the Justice Ministry for the Minister of Justice for 3 years and sat at 2 tables. I'd done my undergraduate thesis on the Innu, Labrador Innu, and how they were politically mobilizing in order to accelerate their table. And then 3 years I spent time at their table and at the table for the Labrador Inuit. Then I went to the Premier's office and I continued working at those 2 tables. And then when I did my master's degree, I did it on the marginalization of Indigenous peoples in Canada. And the reason why all of this caught my interest was because I grew up in St. John's till I was about 12 years old. And I joke with people that growing up in St. John's, my idea of diversity was Protestants. There's not a lot of diversity in St. John's. Increasing, though, which is great. but there wasn't when I was growing up. But when I moved to Goose Bay, Labrador, everything changed. The first people I met when I got off the boat were the Innu leadership. My dad introduced me to them because he had worked with them. And we were moving to Labrador because my dad had a new job. And after that, I went to school with Innu and with Inuit and with Métis. And I often say that Goose Bay, Labrador was the most sophisticated place I could have ever grown up. It introduced me to things and to worlds that I and many Southern Canadians don't get to see. But it moved me, and it changed my life. It introduced me to the richness of Indigenous cultures, of different Indigenous cultures. But it also opened my eyes to the challenges ahead. And so that's what I studied. That's what I worked at. And then CTV, for whatever reason, wanted to hire people who had absolutely no experience or education in television, and they gave me a job. And I didn't want to do it, but my mother said, for God's sake, just go to Toronto for a year and see if it works out. Well, it worked out. And I had a great career. But I'm back where I started. I'm back with where I wanted to be. I wanted to be exactly in this room with you, working with you. That was my intent all along. You have my commitment. You have my heart. My heart is open. My mind is open. Canada M teaches you how to talk, but boy, I tell you, if you really want to be a good interviewer on a national television show, you better be a darn good listener. And I am. And I look forward to working with you. I know we've got many challenges ahead. And I know in this government, we've only got a few months. But we will continue to act in the long term. And we will continue to work with you side by side, finally, the way the government of Canada should have always acted. We are ready and we are with you. And I am committed to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Just before we go to the chiefs for comments, I wanted to introduce the minister to some very important people who have been sitting with us the last few days. And I think it's important that we recognize them here again today. So I'm going to introduce you to Margaret Carpenter. This is our elders. Margaret's over there. Harvey Bell, elder for Associated Iroquois and Allied Indians. He's over there. Gilbert Smith, Grand Council Treaty Number 3. Barney Batiste, where's Barney? Barney's over there. From Land. Gordon Wainebents from the Anishinaabe Nation. Justin is not with us, he had to leave. Norma General Liquors. Right there. A beautiful young lady there. From Six Nations. And from the Mississauga's New Credit First Nation, our host elder, Peter Schuler. Over there. So what we're going to do is that we're going to take notes of all of the questions, and the minister will respond at the end. So microphone number 4.
Chief Elaine Johnson, Serpent River First Nation. I want to thank you, Minister, for coming to speak with us. I'm going to speak to you as politician to politician, since you did that in your ending statements. I just want to challenge you in regards to this whole issue of reconciliation. The previous minister, Jane Philpott, also had a lot of heart and I think was really interested and open to listening to us First Nations, especially on the issue of child welfare. Could really tell that she really had a heart in regards to our children. But I'm going to challenge your government because I'm not happy with what I'm seeing, and I know many of our citizens are not happy with what they're seeing, and it's going to affect the election. And so you're going to have to, when you're talking about campaigning, you're going to talk about what you're going to do for us as First Nations. because our citizens are not happy with what they've been seeing. But I want to talk about the issue of Ontario's fair share. We do not have our fair share in funding. And this is what we really need to see in Ontario. And I know that there's been some economic analysis in regards to our fair share. We are not getting our fair share here in Ontario in housing and child welfare and many areas, health. And I think that that is an issue that I want to raise with you. And how do we deal with that? Because, you know, you talked about housing, and we get a lot of money for services, but we don't get any capital. And so this is an issue that we're all struggling with, because we get money from the federal government and also some from the province where there's no capital, and we have services that are expanding and they've got no place to operate out of. So housing, yes, is an issue. It is. I've got people in my community that are couch surfing, that have no home. We have people that are homeless. So it is an issue for all of us here in Ontario. And I also want to address the issue of child welfare. I am the president of Nogda-Winniman Child Family Services. We've invited you to come up in our area. But the issue for me in regards to the legislation is that we talk about co-development. And what I've heard over the last few days, that there is no really co-development because of your processes within government in regards to legislation. And there is no recognition of our inherent rights, because I heard you in your opening statement saying, you know, we have inherent rights and you recognize that, but there is no recognition. And so there's no recognition of our own law in your legislation. So that to me is a concern in regards to this statement of co-development. And so I just wanted to say that. I think I needed to register the concerns. I appreciate, you know, that your government has provided resources, but I'm also going to challenge you in regards to Jordan's principle and the TRC, that you were taken to task in regards to the human rights. So I just want to say that. I think that you probably wouldn't have provided that funding if you weren't taken to task. So I just needed to acknowledge that, but also to be grateful for the resources that have been put forward. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Chief. Microphone number 3, please.
Good afternoon. Well, it's close. Good morning. Mr. Reagan, chiefs, officials, thank you. I'm Chief Bruce Atsnipaniskum, Martin Falls First Nation, part of Anishinaabe Skin Nation. Our lands are continually being explored these days. Our lands north of the undertaking, that what was called the Far North Act, the Far North. What is happening today is increasingly the lands are looked at for wealth generation. Yet today, our communities are still living in poverty. We have housing shortages. Your ministry had set a pilot project for us. Yet you know that pilot project is not being supported the way it should be. We need continued housing in the north. We need our members looked after. They're increasingly migrating to the cities because of health and education, yet there's no housing there in the cities also. I know of an elder that's in this city because of dialysis and can't get any housing. Our rights should be mobile and be able to go wherever they live or wherever they need to go. So I'm asking you, Minister, to look into our housing, our infrastructure. Our community doesn't have any fire infrastructure, like a fire truck, a fire hall. Yet our lands are continued looking at by mining companies that want to get rich off our lands. So the danger for us is that we're going to get left behind. And that's happened before. So I ask you, Minister, to look into this matter and support First Nations in the far north. Miigwech.
Miigwech. Chief, microphone number 1, please.
Miigwech, Chair. Chief Ignis Gull, Attawapskat First Nation. Mr. Minister, I appreciate the remarks, the words that you delivered just a few minutes ago, but I've heard this before so many times over my time being around for over 30 years, and I'm still trying to entertain that idea that my struggles and my community's needs to be heard, to be more positive towards, more serious in terms of looking after the First Nations, their treaty inherent rights based on the promises that were given to us, such as housing, infrastructure, safe drinking water, more land to build on. I don't need to give you that history of Attawapskat's struggles. Even though, as you understand, that we had a mining company in our backyard that never did anything to help us taking out all the resources, the riches from our territory. And you can talk to your RDG, Ann Scott, and she's been up there a few times trying to accommodate the First Nations needs and aspirations in terms of well-being. And you also mentioned the child welfare. We are in that child welfare struggle too, trying to maintain that right to control our own child welfare issues in our community, as opposed to the province making all kinds of laws that are imposed on us without anything attached to it, in terms like funding, the funding issues that we require to hire our own people, our resources in our community to take care of themselves. That's my vision. I don't want anybody from the outside to come in and do this, because it's been done before. We had all kinds of issues that we're still dealing with today as part of the residential school, and that's ongoing. And the Prime Minister, when he was elected, he talked about reconciliation, respecting First Nations rights, respecting treaty relationships with First Nations. But I haven't seen any of this happening to accommodate the First Nation needs. For an instance, in Attawapskat, we're struggling trying to get a piece of land to build on. We have 420 families that don't have a home, lacking infrastructure like water and sewer. I mean, this should not be happening in this country. You talk about working together with the First Nations. You need to do more than just talk to us at this meeting. You need to provide all the things that we need based on the treaty. The treaty promises that were made to us, and we were forced out from the land to remove us away from the land because we're in the way of economic development. That's the way I look at it. And we were put in a reservation system with all these promises were attached to that the treaty, which never, hardly ever materialized. You know, I mean, it's slow. Things are happening very slow, but not fast enough to catch up with our population growth, the high cost of living, all the other things that are very important to us. You know, I want to thank you for the comments you made, and I mean, I'm not sure how long you'll be in the office, because I have seen ministers come and go, and still I'm here today talking about the same thing I talked about 30 years ago. So let's a little bit be more serious than just talk. Let's do something to help our situation, because you know, it's not our undoing what's happening to us. You know, the white government put us in that situation. They made all kinds of stuff that now that the public believe. You know, I'm not here begging you. I should be a little bit more responsible to find a way to deal with my situation. But that's the way the government system is right now. You know, the Indian Act that we talked about here 3 days ago, tying up our hands to do something to help ourselves. You know, it's not acceptable. You put us in this situation where we are today, you know, and everybody's complaining about First Nations begging all the time and whining all the time and things like that. This is our country. We participated in World War I and II to protect this country, our country, everybody's country. That should be an honor. Yesterday we were honoring the veterans that died in foreign land, that they contributed so much in this land, yet they were not recognized. When they came back to this country from Europe, they were back to square one, no freedom. They never received all the promises that they were told to have when they come back. You know,
excuse
running
me,
water,
Chief Gull?
new housing, water and sewer and stuff like that.
Chief Gull?
Yes,
We have
okay.
a time
The
limitation. Miigwech. For our two speakers at number 4 and number 3, we have limited time. So I ask, please, if you ask your question directly, because the minister needs to leave, and so we want him to address everyone's issues. So if you can make it very quick, please.
All right. Bonjour. Sakachoe, Ndigo, Bijou, Dotem, Gochching, Donji. My name is Brian Perro. I'm the Chief of Gochching First Nation. And I would just like to say, Mr. Minister, thank you for saying that you're going to be dealing with grassy narrows. You know, last December, I stood on Parliament Hill alongside Chief Turtle, and you know, things happened since then. There was something said by the Prime Minister, and what I said on Parliament Hill is mercury poisoning in grassy narrows. Last year, we lost one of our leaders, Grand Chief Steve Fobister. He had Lou Gehrig's disease brought on from mercury poisoning. That was one of our leaders, one of our Grand Chiefs. And that sickness is still there in grassy narrows. They need help. And so I'm encouraged by what you're saying. And I want to invite you to Couchiching First Nation, May 13th to the 16th. We're going to be hosting the Treaty 3 Assembly there, and that I'm hoping that you'll be able to give more time to Chief Turtle when you come to my community. And I just, you know, when I heard you say that and everything that's happened around that issue, just reminded me. One of the last things that Grand Chief Fobister, he called me one day and he said, Brian, I want to see you one more time before I die. And I went to Grass and Arrows and he was bedridden, you know, before he ended up in the hospital. This is a very important issue for all of the people in Treaty 3 because, you know, we know the sufferings of our brothers and sisters there in Grass and Arrows and White Dog. So that's really one of the things I wanted to be sure to invite you as a representative of Canada to come to the Treaty 3 Assembly in my community. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Chief. Stay at microphone number 4, over to number 3, then the last speaker will be Chief Sayers. So please keep your questions quick. Microphone number 4.
Good morning, Seamus. Thank you very much for attending our assembly. I'm Chief Don Miracle, Mohawks the Bay of Quinte. Mike Bosio is our Member of Parliament who I helped get elected when Carolyn Bennett brought him before the last election to ask if I would campaign for him. So the Mohawk vote got him into Parliament. So we were one of the ridings where the Indigenous participation in the election changed the outcome. Ontario region has a crisis in many areas. The Ontario region doesn't get its fair share of capital, as we have mentioned many times to many ministers, that issue remains unaddressed and needs your attention. Ontario has 43 of the 68 boil water advisories, the lion's share, and they need capital to get those things addressed. Some of those issues are urgent. We are affected by climate change. Wells go dry in our communities. We can't change that if the groundwater dries up. In 2016, we had a level 3 drought. 2018, we had a level 2 teetering on a level 3 drought. In the area of long-term care, I know that you've been the Minister of Veterans Affairs. I'd like to tell you a story that happened to one of the veterans' families. Marvel Bernhardt was a veteran in the First and Second World War. His daughter, Sonia Bernhardt, retired at the age of some 80 years old, and she looked after her mother, who lived to be 103 years old. Because of the lack of water, they bought a house off the reserve. This past, on April the 4th, she became sick, she developed dementia, and so her funeral was on Tuesday of this past week because there was no places available for long-term care for her. There is a 2 to 3 year waiting list. It's a crisis in Ontario and needs the attention of the federal government to help out, especially First Nations. So she wandered outside. Her daughter didn't know that she had got up in the night, and she died of hypothermia. Another elder in our community who's my brother, he's been on a waiting list for long-term care now for over 2 years, so finally he got a call because my sister-in-law is 75 years old and she's not physically capable of picking him up off of the floor when he falls. And if people are away at work, there's delayed responses. Sonia Bernhardt was only able to get 2 hours once a week for long-term care off the reserve because of the big demand that's out there, because baby boomers are moving into that bracket and need care. And the federal government cannot be missing in action because you want to look after the vulnerable. These people are young people's grandparents, aunts and uncles and parents. And so Queen Elizabeth recognizes our military history in contribution to Canada. Just a week ago, she gave our community, for our Chapel Royal, her father's prayer book, King George VI, to honor that relationship. We've stood in Canada's defense every time that there's been a war. 101 in the Second World War, 213 in the Korean War, the Gulf War, and one of our members died in Afghanistan in 2010. Their descendants deserve care, whether it's child care, whether it's housing, whether it's water, and long-term care. So what you need to do is with the ministers, have a chat with Minister Duclos to open up the co-investment fund The goal of the National Housing Strategy is to deal with the most in need, the disabled, the most impoverished, Indigenous communities, the vulnerable people. It hits all of the objectives of that, and because we don't have buildings to convert, then we need to be able to construct the new buildings, getting a 40% grant from the co-investment fund. So that's a political decision that's in your hands, and I know that I've been told by Jane Philpott before this SNC Lavalin affair that she was advocating for long-term care to be in part of the 2019 budget. We had a trilateral committee, a chiefs committee, that was authorized by this assembly. Michael O'Byrne, the regional director general, was on it. Keith Kahn from Indigenous Services Health Canada at the time. And I was co-chair along with Sharon Lee Smith, who was an ADM. For the first time in 25 years, the province has made available the opportunity for licenses. I applaud that you support economic development. Long-term care in my community will create 175 jobs, opportunity to learn, and we need some money from the federal government. The province will kick in $12.5 million. FedDev will kick in $5. The co-op corp can put in $3. We need some more money. But we can create jobs, and we can address a very, very urgent need. There's over 30,000 people now in Ontario on waiting lists that are 2 and 3 years long. In my area, there's 1,400 on the list, and 270 are trapped in hospital beds because there's no place to transfer them. That's an urgent issue that needs the attention of the government. Same thing with housing. In Chief Johnson's community, we have people couch surfing, people sleeping on park benches, mothers crying because they can't afford a place to rent to house their children. And yet the department still adds more members to our list to fix the gender discrimination against Indigenous women. But without resources, it doesn't work. You're overwhelming us with a lot of need without the money. So I'd like to hear what your plan is to address these urgent issues that are as crisis situation. And there are 11,450 cases, 55 cases of Ontario Works in Ontario. And so jobs are important to create hope to get some of those people off of Ontario Works into jobs, real jobs with training opportunities and a chance to live and work in a healthy, vibrant First Nation.
Thank you very much, Chief. I would like to move on to the next speaker.
Yeah, there's one more issue. It's important to everybody.
10 seconds.
It's the federal fuel tax. This is going to create more expense for First Nations. The Indian Act says we're exempt of taxes. And yet I understand there was an AFN committee with the Chiefs of Ontario that were supposed to address this issue, but they didn't get it right. So how is this whole... Alberta has been exempted from the carbon tax. What about the First Nations who live on the reserve? How can they be exempted from the carbon tax? Because the Indian Act says they're supposed to be exempt.
Thank you very much, Chief Miracle. Microphone number 3, please. Just to let you know, Chief Pamadjuan, we have like 4 minutes left, so we're going to have to split this between you and Chief Sayers. So microphone number 3.
Good afternoon. I don't think I'm long-winded, so I'm going to get right to the point. Good afternoon there, Minister. I welcome the opportunity to speak to you here. I think some of the concerns that my community has is that we've now come to a point where we're starting to straighten out our land claim. And we have a claim that was accepted by Canada, and it deals with the leagues versus miles. And we've indicated to Canada that we're prepared to sit down and negotiate. And we're talking about something like 90,000 acres that, that was shortfall in our community. And one of the things that I even recognize is that as we go forward, it always seems that Ontario is dragging its feet. And I'm wondering, I always believe that the federal government is holding, the responsibility, the fiduciary responsibility to ensure that the treaty itself is taken care of and all of the details. But it seems to me that the administration of the treaty is something that is something to be desired. I would encourage you to speak with Ontario to get in line and start to deal with my people properly, because I think that is so important when we talk about moving forward all the time. You know, moving forward for who? I think that's the big question, but I think I keep hearing the same thing too. A lot of people have been here for 40 years. I have too. So I don't want to keep on doing this. I'm going to run out of time here.
You ran out of time.
So
Chief
one more
Pamajuan?
quick thing. One more quick thing before you run away
you got
on me.
5 seconds.
Okay, 20 seconds.
5.
All right. I'm really worried about the Great Lakes. And I want to tell you that that was never on the treaty table. I think you folks got to sit down with us and talk about the Great Lakes.
Miigwech Chief Pamajuan, Chief Sayers, I'm going to beg you, please, keep it as quick as you can.
Thank you, Daryl. Abojo Gamon Nevadagojing Guyakisid Shnakaz Bachunang Donji Kijakto Dam. Good afternoon, Minister O'Regan. Thank you for joining us here this afternoon in Toronto, in Ontario, in Nishnawbek, and Ongwehoe, in First Nations lands. What I wanted to bring to your attention was my staff has indicated to me that we, after review of our most recent contribution agreement, we found that we're short $500,000 for post-secondary education. We are starting to think about how we're going to be able to accommodate that. We don't want to not allow our high school students to go to post-secondary institutions. So we're paying our bills, we're still sharing our resources, we're still sharing everything that we committed to in the treaty. I think Canada needs to provide proper support to us based on our community's identified needs, including post-secondary. So if we could make sure that that's fixed sooner than later, we have to commit to our kids that they can continue their post-secondary education. The second thing I wanted to mention was next week, thank you for the investment in our new water systems in Gooley and Obadjuan. We anticipate, according to our estimations, that's going to be up between closer to $7 million. We anticipate to be announced before June. We are right now going through a tendering process, the engineering portions, the planning, up about $600,000 we're currently expending. And we've been struggling to have an announcement of this since December. And I'm hoping, as per some of your hopeful previous conversations with Minister Philpott, that you can attend in Sault Ste. Marie on Tuesday for the $600,000 announcement that will get this work shored up. The work is already happening. MP Terry Sheehan is committed to be there, and we'd hope that you'd be able to join us as well. So Tuesday, 10 a.m. in Sault Ste. Marie, we'd love to have you there, and we'll even buy you lunch. Miigwech, have a wonderful day, Minister.
Miigwech, Chief, thank you very much. And Minister, I'd like to invite you back up to offer some responses.
Thank you, Miigwech. You can't beat face-to-face, so I really appreciate this. Chief Sayers, thank you for the invitation. Well, I'll have to check. I'm not sure if I can be able to make it for the Tuesday, but we'll find a date, because I'd love to visit. So we'll figure it out. And as far as the $500,000 for post-secondary education, can you maybe speak to my RDG, and we can see what's going on there. So I think I'm going backwards here. Chief Pamajuan, yeah, I mean, you've been around for 40 years. I mean, I would hope you've seen a difference lately. And if there's not, then we still have a lot of work to do, I acknowledge. But if you haven't seen any difference, we've got a lot of work to do. I'll speak to my colleague Carolyn Bennett on the specific issues that you brought up. I mean, it's very good. I think the division of the department, of the former department, into so one minister can concentrate on services and when the other one can concentrate on tables. I think that division of labor has worked well, and I can tell you, that Minister Bennett and I work hand in glove together, because that's the boss's orders. That's how he wants us to work, A. But B, it's the most effective way to work. Carolyn brings an incredible amount of knowledge and commitment and a lifelong passion for this. Her Rolodex, as many of you know in this room, is huge. And she and I I've known her for quite some time, but she and I lately have become
good friends, and we work together very closely. In fact, we just had, it's very interesting, I don't think many people in the country know this. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it, but anyway. The Prime Minister does things called a stock take. And he takes a given issue, and it's kind of like a verbal examination. I think I got 5 days' notice to cram. And you sit there, and he grills you on your file. He himself grills you on your file. My deputy minister was there, but it was Minister Bennett and myself who had to sit there and make the case that there is progress, and progress will continue. He has a very deep and abiding interest in this, and you got to know your stuff, and he insists that we work together. This is not about ego. This is about getting the job done, and I'm a firm believer in that. Chief Miracle. Yeah, I agree. There's an awful lot there now, an awful lot of notes I took. I think we're up to 83 long-term drinking water advisories, 83 now being lifted. We're on track for our commitment for 2020. In Ontario, I think we've lifted 33, Ann, with 41 left. And most importantly, we're building capacity on the ground so that you have that capability to look after it. That's what's really important, these developments are sustainable. But on long-term care, I will continue to advocate. I'm equally as committed as my predecessor. We are working with the province, and I know we're working with you, and we'll get there. And I know, actually, I'll be talking, there you are, Chief Miracle. I will be talking more and talk about, I'm committed to the table. We're going to be talking more later on this afternoon, I think. We could talk about that and housing perhaps in a little more detail. Yeah, no, I hear you loud and clear, and we'll work with you and we'll work with the province on it. No question about the demand. I hear you loud and clear. Chief Perot, I think you'd mentioned May 13th, May 16th. Well, that's Treaty 3 Assembly. I'll check my calendar. If I can't make it on the specific dates, I will do my absolute best to pay a visit at some point, because I do firmly believe in visiting communities and visiting leadership on the ground. Chief Gull and Attawapiskat. First of all, where are you, Chief Gull? Okay, well, if he's not here, if he had to step out, I want to take the opportunity to thank him for his leadership, because I know how deeply committed he has been for a long time to keeping drugs out of Attawapiskat, and he is to be commended for that. He has worked very hard. We're working very hard on the same thing, and his leadership has been key. We are delivering now $3.3 million annually to mental health for young people in Attawapiskat. That's $3.3 million a year, and the Choose Life program there is helping some 1,050 young people. And I know he mentioned that he's heard words before, but I do believe on some of these issues we are beginning to walk the talk. And we certainly have been concentrating very much on Attawapiskat, and I'm very happy that their youth center is going to be opening, and the basketball court is going to be there. I will not be playing on that basketball court, but I have told Carolyn Bennett I will watch her do layups. She doesn't know that I said that. I also, Chief Gull, it really struck me what you said about veterans, and I think a couple of you mentioned that. As some of you know, I used to be the Minister of Veterans Affairs, and during my tenure there for a year and a half, we pushed very hard to make sure that there was deeper recognition, and for some, the first time recognition of Indigenous veterans, which is shameful. So we are working diligently to correct that. And in fact, I was just speaking with my successor, Minister Macaulay, and he is committed to doing that work. We've already made some, I know, significant movement on that in Manitoba. We'll keep at it. Chief Ashneepineskum. Bruce? Chief Bruce. I get called Seamus Oregon an awful lot, so I'm very particular about getting proper names right. So my apologies. I know we're working on a pilot project with you on housing. 3 communities, 54 units that we've been working on with you. I know it's not enough, but I promise that we will keep working together. And Chief Elaine Johnson, there were a few things I'd like to say. On C-92, this is the first time that clear and rightful jurisdiction over child and family services has been written into legislation. And I was very proud when we introduced that bill to the House to stand beside the National Chief with President Obed, with President Clem of the Métis National Council. We truly worked hand in glove together in getting that legislation exactly right. That was a very, very deep commitment, and it was the first time that the Government of Canada has ever worked so closely in making sure that that commitment was enshrined, as it should be. I'm not looking at you and saying I want gratitude. I'm saying that it's, and I would ask for an acknowledgement that that has occurred. That's a fact, and it's really, really important. And we are committed to working with individual communities, individual nations to make sure that it is tailored exactly to how they want it. In fact, more to the point, they're going to do the tailoring. We have put in agreed upon national principles that puts the child first, that enshrines the importance of culture and community and family, that enshrines the importance of dignity when a family and a child have to deal with the healthcare system, that their dignity be upheld, that they not be talked down to, that they are in charge of their own health, that they are in charge of their families, that their community be utilized and respected. And I am in no way going to say that we aren't getting it perfect, but as of Budget 19, we have put $20 billion of new money into Indigenous services, Indigenous programming, and to the tables. It is the most we've ever seen in Canadian history. And I will repeat it, I'm not asking for gratitude. I'm not asking for appreciation. An acknowledgement, and an acknowledgement that we got a long way to go. And I am keenly aware that some of you have seen ministers in this position come and go. I can only speak to my determination and my commitment while I hold this position. And how long I hold this position is at the discretion of the Prime Minister. And on October 21st, it'll be at the discretion of the people of Canada. And I hope dearly, after that I still hold this position. Because as I told you before, my heart is in it. But ministers may come and go, but I can tell you one thing. The Prime Minister's commitment to reconciliation is firm, and it is tangible, and it is real. And every single one of our mandate letters, whether you're the Minister of Indigenous Services, or the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, or the Minister of Health, or the Minister of Defense, or the Minister of Finance, or the President of Treasury Board, every single one of those mandate letters mandates that minister to reconciliation. Every single minister. Every single one. And on the Cabinet Committee on Reconciliation and on the full Cabinet, there are ministers from all jurisdictions who all speak to this issue. It is not just 2 departments. It is a Prime Minister that has demanded action from every single part of the federal government and every single minister. So no matter what no matter what portfolio a minister holds, they are committed to reconciliation, because that is the Prime Minister's commitment. And listen, you will have a choice to make come October 21st. And you will judge us on what we have done and what we haven't done, but what we are working on. But I would ask you to gauge us on the real progress that has been made. I would ask you to gauge us on our commitment, and I would ask you to demand the same from others. Demand it. Let's make reconciliation an election issue. Nothing would make me happier. Nothing. Thank you very much. Thank you for your honest questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now I'd like to call upon our Ontario Regional Chief.
First of all, I want to thank all of the chiefs who posed questions and have asked the minister for commitments of time and resources and energy. And I will be following up with the minister on those commitments in terms of what he's asking. So I assure you that I will follow up with the minister's office. And I wanted to just go back quickly to one of the comments that you made about wealth building. And, you know, we do have these issues in front of us, chiefs, the day-to-day issues, the difficulties we face. And one of the long-term solutions is to build wealth in our communities. And by building that wealth, it has to be based upon our treaties. So we have treaties that were about sharing this resource and all of our resources in our land with settlers. And so as we look toward wealth building, one of the things we're finding is that there are barriers. There are legislative barriers, there are policy barriers, and this is something I brought up to the minister in 2 conversations so far. And the minister has committed in both of those conversations to me that we're going to start working on that here in Ontario. And so there's a resolution that I'd like to bring up before we leave, perhaps right after the minister leaves, on that particular issue of creating that light at the end of our tunnel, of creating a place that we're moving toward that allows you to fix the problems in your community without, as Chief Gull said, going hand in hat to the government. But ask that government, what are you going to do to remove barriers that will create wealth in our communities? And so when we get to that place, we will be self-sufficient, we will be self-governing because we'll have our own resources. So that's one of the visions that I had when I came into this position. It's something that Minister O'Regan shares, and I'm so grateful for that. And I know that we're going to continue to work on that, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And I give you this small gift as a token of our appreciation for your time and your energy. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Ontario Regional Chief and Minister, thank you very much, and you and your staff for being here this afternoon. But what I'd like to also do, just before you depart, is that yesterday we had a presentation by the youth. And I'd like to invite the youth who are still here to come on up. Come on up, and I'd like you to meet them, shake their hand, thank them for all the hard work that they do, because they're the next generation that we're going to be dealing with. So all of our young people here at the Youth Council. Chief, did you want to speak now, or do you want to wait? Okay. Okay. Just before we close, Minister, we have a couple of brief statements. Microphone 3, then microphone 4. Microphone 3, please.
Good afternoon, Chief Denise Stonefish, El Napawi La Kawit, or as the government's AKA, Moravian of the Thames. I just wanted the minister to know that that while there had been significant work done on the child welfare legislation and the other pieces of legislation that are currently being drafted, not everyone is happy with the way the legislation is. So I didn't want you to leave here thinking that it was fine, that there still are problems and there still are issues that need to be dealt with. You know, along with those 4 pieces of legislation and the Indigenous rights framework. So I just didn't feel comfortable in you leaving without knowing that there are still some issues and problems that need to be resolved.
Miigwech Chief, microphone 4 for the last and final comment.
Bujo Maingan, Chippewa, Thames First Nation. I appreciate your comments, but I think we can take this a little further by entrenching that in the constitution of this country so the next government comes in and changes this whole mandate. I think those views are good, but if it only stays with your government, then the next government's going to change things. So we need some fundamental changes that's entrenched in the Canadian Constitution. That way there's no question to what we want to do in terms of reconciliation in this country. So get maybe moving on something that solid so that we don't have to go through this again. Should there be a change of government, we always know what's right, and First Nation people are respected in this country. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Chief Henry. Thank you very much. That concludes this part of the agenda. I'll hand it over to my co-chair.
Thank you, Daryl. So the next item on the agenda is an in-camera session that was scheduled for earlier this morning, and we're supposed to be hearing a presentation from Patrick Madabi regarding the issue. I just saw him outside the